Health is wealth and knowledge is power. Good afternoon. I am Udita Sharma, Assistant Professor, Department of Psychology, BSSS Bhopal. Today we are here to discuss a few topics from the paper Psychology of Health and Well-being. Let us take a quick overview at what all topics will we be discussing in today's session. Firstly, we will try to understand what exactly is the meaning of psychology of health and well-being, what does this paper signify. Secondly, we will go into a detailing of the meaning of the terms health, illness and well-being. How are these terms similar and how are they different? What exactly do they signify and how is the literal meaning different from that of our day-to-day usage? Third thing that we will be discussing is the cross-cultural perspective on health. Majorly, how the Eastern perspective of health is different from the Western perspective of health. And lastly, we will discuss a topic, health and wellness continuum. Health and wellness continuum basically indicates how a person can shift from being healthy to unhealthy. So let's begin the discussion on this very subject. Firstly, let us try to understand what exactly is the psychology of health and well-being. Well, this is an interdisciplinary field. When I say interdisciplinary field, I mean that this subject seeks contribution from several different fields. So, the paper of Psychology of Health and Well-being tries to explore the relationship between mental, emotional and social factors and their physical health outcomes. Basically, how our mental health, our emotional health and our social situations, our social circumstances, how do they play an impact on our physical health? This is what this subject deals with. If we talk about some major topics which come under this topic, some very popular of those topics are stress, the impact of stress in an individual's life, then the role of emotions on your health, what is the impact of positive emotions on your health, as well as how can your health be impacted if you are extremely dominated by negative emotions. The next area widely discussed under this field is role of personality factors in health and illness. There are certain types of personalities which are more prone to certain kind of illnesses. For example, people belonging to type A personality, they are more prone to developing illnesses or problems such as high blood pressure or cardiovascular disorders, things of that sort. Then the next area of discussion under this field comes from health enhancing and health compromising behaviors. Health enhancing and health compromising behaviors are basically patterns of our day-to-day life, practices from our day-to-day life which are either health enhancing or they can help us from bouncing back from illness or any kind of injury, and health compromising behaviors are those which lead to a downward trend in an individual's health or the factors which delay the chances of your recovery. Last but not the least, the psychology of health and well-being heavily talks about enhancing your overall health, be it your physical health or mental health. It talks about enhancing your resilience, which is the ability to bounce back from adversity, and it heavily discusses about well-being, which we would be discussing shortly, that what exactly is well-being. So, having done with the overview of this paper as such, that what does psychology of health and well-being mean, let us move ahead to the next topic, which is the concept of health. What exactly does health mean? Alright, so the term health basically comes from an old English word health, H-O-E-L-T-H. It is emerged out of this old English word, and if we were to define health, what better than to use World Health Organization's definition for using it. So, the World Health Organization in the year 1998 defined health as a dynamic state of complete physical, mental, spiritual and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmary. A dynamic state of complete physical, mental, spiritual and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmary. So, I have repeated the definition here twice, and we can see that WHO has given such a wide and comprehensive definition of health. It is just not related to your physical health, but also encompasses several other aspects. Let us take a look at them one by one. If we break down the definition of health given by WHO, we can look at 4 major points over here. Firstly, the definition emphasizes that health is not equivalent to absence of disease or symptoms. Absence of disease or symptoms is at the focus here, because it is generally believed that the popular notion of health is that if you are free from symptoms, that means you are free from disease or illness. However, it is in reality that is not true, because your health is not just limited to your physical symptoms. Second emphasis of this definition is health is dynamic in nature. A very important point stating that health is dynamic in nature, because the word dynamic in itself means something that keeps on changing, something that keeps on modifying. So, when we say that health is dynamic in nature, we are trying to say that your current state of health is susceptible to change. One day you might feel healthy, the other day you might not feel so healthy, or for the first 20 to 25 years of your life you might be a very happy and healthy individual, while for the later half of your life you might be something from some or the other illness or disease. So, our health is dynamic, our health status keeps on fluctuating. Thirdly, the third point is not just your physical well-being, but mental, social and spiritual well-being are equally important. A very important point here, because the ancient conceptualization of health was only limited to your physical health, physical well-being. However, in modern days, in modern terms, we realize that mental, social and spiritual components form an equally important component of your overall health. So, that is what is emphasized in this definition, that mental, social and spiritual well-being are equally important. And finally, our health is a composition of these 4 dimensions. Which 4 dimensions are we talking about? We are talking about your physical health, mental health, social health and spiritual health. Taken together, if a person is doing well in all 4 of these areas, only then can an individual be considered healthy in true sense. Now, let us move on to the next concept, a word which I have been using very frequently until now in this video, which is well-being. What exactly does well-being mean? Well-being is also known as subjective well-being. Another term for well-being is subjective well-being, because the literal meaning of well-being in itself has a component of subjectivity. In other words, well-being is your overall appraisal of your level of happiness and life satisfaction. When I say your own level of happiness and your own level of life satisfaction, that indicates that my definition of well-being might be different from your definition of well-being. For you, well-being might be a decent standard of living, sound health, healthy interpersonal relationships, but for me, well-being might have some other standard or some entirely new meaning. So, each one of us has different definitions to what our well-being is. Therefore, well-being is one's appraisal of one's own level of happiness and life satisfaction, your own appraisal of these 2 factors. When we talk about assessing well-being, that if I am saying that my level of well-being might be different and your level and your understanding of well-being might be different, then how can we assess well-being on basis of a common parameter? So, well-being is generally assessed across 2 components. The first component on which well-being is measured is affective well-being. Affect in terms of psychology basically means emotion, something which has to do with your emotions. So, affective well-being then signifies whether the person is feeling happy, whether the person is feeling pleasant, if the person is feeling satisfied, positive, if the person is optimistic about his or her future and things of that sort. Basically, things which have to deal with emotional aspects would come under affective well-being. And the second aspect of well-being is cognitive well-being. Cognition in psychology has to do with your mental processes, thoughts, beliefs, your perception, judgment, memory, things of that sort. So, when I say cognitive well-being basically signifies things like overall life satisfaction, your specific life experiences, for example, job satisfaction. two people working in the same organization might have very different perspective of their jobs. Their level of satisfaction might be very different from their job, from the same organization. So, if I am a person who is not very satisfied with my workplace and my current job, my job satisfaction is low, which means my cognitive well-being there would be low. On the other hand, if I have a colleague who is very happy and satisfied with the kind of job she is doing, her level of job satisfaction would be high, which in turn would indicate that the cognitive well-being of the person would be high. So, well-being is our subjective appraisal of our level of happiness and life satisfaction, which is measured across these two areas, which are affective well-being and cognitive well-being. Moving ahead to the next topic. Three terms we use almost interchangeably, but which have some or the other differences in themselves. I am talking about the terms illness, disease and sickness. In our day-to-day lives, all through our lives we use these terms interchangeably, but when we talk about these terms in technical aspects, these terms are slightly different. They carry slightly different meaning. One by one, we will try to understand what these terms exactly mean. The first term we will pick up here is disease. What exactly does disease mean? So, the term disease has a connotation which is used by physicians or doctors for proper medical diagnosis and pathological symptoms. Pathological symptoms, diagnosis and biological aspects of health conditions are the key terms here. We use the term disease only when we are talking about biological aspects of some specific disease which is diagnosed by a health physician or a doctor, something which is very much technical in nature. This difference will become more clear when we look at the other few terms. The next term is illness. Illness again has a subjective component to it. Illness is used to describe the perceived deterioration in health. That means even though a doctor might not have diagnosed an individual with something yet, but as a person, if I am suffering from a set of symptoms, if I am suffering from a set of signs and symptoms, that indicates that I might use the term illness for me. The next term here is sickness. Sickness denotes the societal role and perception related to a particular illness. Sickness denotes the societal role and perception related to a particular illness. Now, let us try to understand with the help of examples how these three terms are different from one another. We first talked about disease, which has a medical component in it, which requires diagnosis by a physician in it. The second term was illness. Illness is the subjective component of a physical symptom, and sickness is the societal role allotted to it. So, for example, a 10-year-old boy has high fever and running nose. Now, we'll try to understand these three terms with the help of this example. Okay. So, if the 10-year-old boy has high fever and he is reporting to his mother that I have high fever, my head is paining, I have a runny nose. All of these are the subjective interpretations of the boy. The boy is listing these symptoms and he is saying that I feel that I have fever today, so I cannot go to school. All of this were the subjective perceptions of the boy. So, these would fall under the category of illness, because illness has a component of subjectivity. Illness may or may not be diagnosed by a doctor. The next term we discussed was disease. Disease here is something which is diagnosed and pathologically defined by a medical professional. So, for example, the same year-old boy is taken to doctor with her mother, and the doctor runs a few medical tests and finally diagnoses that it is not regular seasonal flu, but the child is suffering from say malaria. So, the specific diagnosis done by a medical professional therein would be disease. And the last term we discussed was sickness. So, sickness indicates the societal role and perception of that disease. For example, each kind of sickness or disease has some societal role allotted to us. We have perceptions set in our mind that if somebody has fever, the person should be given cold baths. If somebody has a stomach upset, the diet taken by the individual should be very light and free from excessive oil and salts, things of that sort. Yeah, or another example of sickness in this context would be that we would expect, if a child is claiming that he or she has fever, the child would be expected to take rest, to not go out in the sun, to not go in the evening and play, and to have a certain kind of food, to follow a certain kind of lifestyle. All those things which come under the societal perception of that illness would come under the sickness term. Moving ahead to the next topic, which is cross-cultural perspective on health. Cross-cultural perspective basically talks about how the conceptualization of health differs from culture to culture. When we talk about cross-cultural perspective, we majorly talk about two cultures. One is the Western perspective of health and the other is Eastern perspective of health. We will begin by discussing Western perspective on health. The Western perspective of health, or as we know, Western medicine, is majorly concerned with diagnosing and treating specific diseases. The Western medical model focuses on treating very specific diseases, and it is heavily based on scientific evidences and testing. So, the kind of medical model which is most widely popularized today, one which has a lot of tests, lot of medications, lot of symptomatic treatments related to specific illnesses or diseases, is majorly the Western medical model. It is also known as the reductionist approach, because it is said that the Western medical model does not take a very wide or comprehensive view of health or illness. It only focuses on specific body parts. It will only talk about the symptoms you have at hand, not your holistic well-being, not your whole health. But if you are only going to a doctor with a complaint that you have high fever, it is largely going to be concerned, your treatment modality will largely be concerned around that specific act of having fever. Or if you are going to a doctor with a complaint of pain in abdomen, rather than focusing on your whole body, on your emotions, on your social health, the Western medical model would only focus on the pain arising out of your abdomen and the area surrounding it. So, therefore, this model is known to deal with very specific diseases, and it has a very reductionist approach. It heavily relies on drugs, surgery, medical examination and specific detailed testing for specific areas or diseases. So, the Western medical model is one which aims to diagnose and treat specific diseases. The next model at our hand is Eastern medical model. Eastern medical model takes a more holistic perspective. It takes a more holistic approach to health and well-being, and while treating the individual, it takes into consideration not just the physical symptoms which are at hand, but it also considers your mind, your spiritual health, your emotional health, basically the modern conceptualization of health which we were talking about in the holistic definition of health given by WHO. That definition of health somewhat coincides with the Eastern medical model, because as compared to the Western medical approach, the Eastern health approach has a more comprehensive and greater approach to health. It not only focuses on physical symptoms, but all the other aspects also, such as your mental health, your social adjustment, your spiritual well-being and things of that sort. This Eastern model aims to create a balance between all of these components, your body, mind, spiritual component, social component, all of these aspects need to be balanced, only then a person would be happy. The last point about Eastern perspective we need to discuss here is, it is a more inclusive model of health. It includes alternative therapies, it includes herbal medication, the importance of meditation and yoga is highlighted in these models. Lastly, the final topic for this discussion is illness-wellness continuum. Illness-wellness continuum was proposed by John Travis in the year 1972. He worked on the assumption that health is dynamic, our health is ever changing, we might be healthy at one moment and unhealthy at the other moment. So, John Travis proposed this illness and wellness continuum, with the assumption that health is dynamic. As we can see, a neutral point is highlighted in his diagram. When a person is at the neutral state, the person is neither extremely healthy nor extremely unhealthy, but at any given point of time our health might move from neutral to high level of wellness or from neutral to premature death or diseases. Standing at the neutral point, a person who has more awareness, education and growth mindset about health would move towards the right end of the continuum, which says that a person, if practices awareness, education and the knowledge attained from there, might become a more healthy and functioning individual. On the other hand, if a person is showing signs and symptoms of disease and disability and is not seeking proper preventive and treatment measures, the person is more prone for premature death and diseases. However, the positive note here is our health is dynamic. So, even if the person is moving towards the left side of the continuum, which says the person can be prone to premature death, even then if we seek proper treatment, we can move back towards the neutral point and from the neutral point towards the highly functioning level of well-being. So, this was the illness and wellness continuum proposed by John Travis. The continuum had two ends, one with positive health, the other with negative health outcomes, and a person might shift his current state of health or illness from one point to another. So, this was a brief introduction about the paper of Psychology of Health and Well-being. In the upcoming modules, we will discuss certain more topics regarding the same paper. I hope this was helpful. Thank you.